Happy Memorial Day, everybody. I hope everybody had a nice vacation. Let's get back to work. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Clint McLean. And this week we are headed to Stockholm, Sweden. We're going to break down the card that is headlined by Anthony Lionheart Smith and Alexander Gustafsson. And you know what? We're coming off of a break week. I was intending to get a nice little podcast out for everybody that was maybe non-UFC related, something a little more speculative or some, fun gambling stories, something along those lines. But I got to tell you all, I was just exhausted after the roller coaster we've been on lately. So I apologize for there not being a podcast out last week. But we're back, and we're going to get right into it this week. We're going to look at this week's card. First off, we'll do a slight recap of UFC Rochester, where we got off the schneid and we got back to our winning ways. It was a small win, but damn, I will take it after the last couple of events. So let's get right into that. Now, you may have noticed that the podcast is dropping just a little bit earlier than usual today, and that's because I'm recording from vacation. I don't know if you guys can hear this or not, but if you hear some slight background noise, that's because I am staring at the ocean. I'm recording this podcast from the beach, and boy, is it nice. It's very, very relaxing. So I do apologize if there's a little background noise, but just let it relax you while you listen to the breakdown of this card and we get ready to throw some action down on some more fights. So UFC Rochester went almost exactly as planned. Now, I gotta be full, frank, and honest with everybody. That's one of the things I like to do, is I don't hide anything from my listeners and my followers. I had flashbacks from Vietnam. At the beginning of UFC Rochester, the leans that I had that I did not make official picks were cashing, and then our very first pick of the night, which was Pat Cummins, got absolutely murked in the first round. I thought we were in for another god-awful night. I really thought that it was just going to go south. It seemed like everything that I was thinking was just ever so slightly off. The guys that I didn't have the balls to pull the trigger on were the ones that were coming through, and then the ones that I actually did have the balls to pull the trigger on, those ones were losing, and I was like, oh no, here we go again. But the ship righted itself. We got through it. It is okay. And honestly, looking back at it, like, one of those guys was Zach Cummings. He really was getting whooped basically through rounds 1 and 2. I know a lot of people thought it was closer, but I did not think he was winning that fight going into the third. And then he pulled it off in round 3. And that's where I did not feel comfortable laying the money on him. I know he was a slight underdog when he kicked off. I know he won the fight. So it seems like maybe we should have made that bet. And if any of you did play that and then cash that bet based on my breakdown, congratulations. He should not have won that fight, but he found a way to. So wow. I mean, honestly, I'm glad we passed on that one because he was a rightful underdog. I really don't think that he was the better of the two fighter, but with his opponent having the layoff that he did, it managed for him to get in there and pull the upset late when he started to slow down or gas out. So that was tough to watch. You always hate seeing those leans that turn into winners roll on by. But then we had Pat Cummings, and honestly, he looked great. Pat Cummins was doing exactly what I said he was going to do, and I really thought he would be able to keep that up for the course of 3 rounds. He was getting in, he was landing, he was getting out, and everything seemed to be going perfectly to plan. And then once Herman got a little more tired, those takedowns would have started landing. Pat Cummins doesn't stop. He continues going for the takedown over and over and over again. So eventually he would have locked one of those takedowns up, and it would have been more and more in our favor as the fight got deeper and deeper. But you know what? This is MMA. This is why we love the sport. Everybody's got a puncher's chance. Herman caught Pat Cummins with a huge knee, and I'll be honest, I thought, at least, it would have taken more than one clean shot to take out Cummins. I know Cummins does not have the best chin, but that was ridiculous. The knee was solid, but I didn't think it was going to be the kind of knee that would knock somebody out stiff. So props to Ed Herman. He busted our parlay. Aspen Ladd did exactly what I said she was going to. She was the better fighter over the course of 3 rounds. Unfortunately, we did not get to cash that parlay because she was tied to Pat Cummins. But if anybody played Aspen Ladd straight, well, there you go. She was the rightful favorite, and I'm glad she got it done. Onto the co-main and main event for UFC Rochester, we had Ian Heinch, who played a pitch perfect game. Oh my goodness. He did exactly what I said he was going to. He weathered the early storm in round 1. He was tenacious and he was able to defend himself on the ground. Shoeface slowed down ever so slightly, and Ian just poured it on for rounds 2 and 3 and got it done by decision. I was really kind of hoping he would come through and get it done inside the distance so we didn't have to sweat that judge's call, but they got it right. The right fighter won, and Ian Heich pulled it off as a plus 160 favorite for us. Oh, that felt good. Getting back on it, because, man, if Aspen Ladd had been our only win for the evening, I think I might have cried. So Ian Heich gets it done as a big dog. I am excited for this kid. I'm really high on Ian Heich, as you all know, and looking forward, I can't wait to see who his next opponent is going to be. And the main event at UFC Rochester is just one more fight that really solidified the fact that I haven't lost my touch. I called that to a T. RDA is the better, more seasoned fighter. He's spent his last 2 fights grappling with the best 2 grapplers that 170 pounds has to offer. And poor Kevin Lee. I mean, I like Kevin Lee. He's a great guy. And honestly, I think he's still got some star power. If he can figure this thing out at 170, I think he could be dangerous. But I think he's just in the middle of the pack. He's not going to ever be the champion at 155 because he can't consistently make the weight class. And he's too small for 170, so he's never going to be the champion there. He's never going to be able to out-wrestle the guys at the top of the division, like Kamaru Usman, like Colby Covington. I just think he's going to be kind of a gatekeeper. He can be an exciting fighter. He can be a fan favorite. And I think he can have a long, fun career in MMA. I just don't ever see him getting the strap, honestly. And that's what we banked on. RDA is championship caliber. He showed that veteran savvy. He was able to weather the storm, and then he came back and he poured it on Kevin Lee. You could see Kevin Lee kind of start to break when you get into rounds, the later end of 3, round 4, round 5. Kevin Lee just cannot keep it up. When he puts everything he's got into a guy and they do not go down, you can see him physically deflate. He starts thinking to himself, what do I have to do to finish this man? And when you can see that on somebody's face, that's not a good recipe. You know he's going to eventually wilt and break, and that's exactly what happened. And honestly, I'm really bummed we didn't get the dog price. We had RDA at minus 111, and you could have gotten him at like plus 130 before the fight kicked off. So much late money came in on Kevin Lee. I was shocked. Now, the favorites always tend to close as bigger favorites. The dogs always tend to close as bigger dogs because people are chasing, especially when it comes to like the main and the co-main events. People just start throwing money at those fights right before they kick off, trying to get something back. So I'm not surprised that more late money came in against us there. But wow, it would have been so fun to have RDA at a dog price. I did not expect him to close quite that late. I thought there'd be more buyback with people having the mindset, like we do, honestly, that he was just going to be the better and the deeper end type of fighter. But I guess we were alone there. So there you go, diehards. We pulled off a couple of picks that nobody else was going to be on. So you're welcome. Let's move this thing right along to this week's card. Oh, I almost forgot. That brings the show's overall record to 58-49 for plus 28.46 units. A little bit of healing inches us a little bit closer to that plus 30 units mark, which I love. And really, I want to end the year at 50. I know we can get there. And if we can be careful and inch a little closer, it would be awesome. My goal for 2019 is to be up over 50 units. So with that said, last thing, I promise, let's jump right in. It has been an entire 2 weeks since we've had some MMA action, and I am chomping at the bit to get back at this thing. I love it. Those week breaks, they really make me hungry. You know, I think they're good because we actually get a break from the mental break that we get. We get to take a little time off, reset, take a deep breath. It's not quite so much turn and burn, but man, when they come back around, I am so ready to go. I've got some MMA to look forward to here. We've got some action that we're going to throw down, and there is no better feeling. So let's get it. This week, UFC Sweden, we go to Stockholm, and the fight kicks off in the lightweight division with Danilo Bilardo versus Joel Alvarez, 12-3-0 versus 15-2-0. And honestly, I do not have a good read on this fight. I don't really like starting off the card with a fight that I don't have much of a pick or much of a breakdown on, so I do apologize for that. But The one guy lost his first UFC fight. That would be Joel Alvarez. And I do think that he is the better of the two fighters. He stepped in versus Damir Ismagulov, which is not an easy task, and he lost a 3-round unanimous decision. Danilo is stepping into the UFC for the first time, so he is a debut fighter against a 0-1 UFC fighter. This one really could go either way, and that's just too much volatility for me right now. I don't feel like jumping headlong into that, especially because I feel like the value has been pounded out of this line. It opened up a little wide with Joel Alvarez being a bigger favorite. About 60% of the money has come in on Bilardo, and now they're basically a pick'em. I do think Joel Alvarez is probably the better of these two fighters, but again, he stepped up to the UFC level and he lost that first match, so it could be close. With him having only 2 losses and one of those being to a UFC caliber guy, and then Bilardo having 3 losses outside of the UFC, with all 3 of them coming by KO, maybe Joel Alvarez is worth a poke. I would lean towards Joel Alvarez, but we will not be making a bet on that particular fight. The first fight that we are interested in is Darko Stosic versus Devin Clark. Darko is 13-1-0 facing Devin Clark, who is 9-3-0. And if you recall Devin Clark's name, that's because we recently just broke down a fight against his that got canceled. He was supposed to fight on the UFC Russia card, and we were going to fade the shit out of him. And you know what the fun part about this is? That game plan hasn't changed. We are still going to fade the shit out of Devin Clark. I am not high on this guy. I don't think he's all that great, and especially he's fighting up a weight class. They've got him fighting at 205, and this guy is a 185er. He's a 205er from the waist down, and I know I said this last time, if any of you recall, but that is not a dick joke. He's got massive legs. He looks like an NFL running back. This guy's thighs are the size of my head, but his upper body and his height, he's just not that big. You get him in there against natural-looking, natural-sized 205ers, and he looks so small. He's explosive, but he doesn't have knockout power. It's crazy. He's explosive, and he's got some pop on his punches. You can see he kind of like clips guys, and they reel back a little bit, but he doesn't really cleanly put anybody out. He's only got 3 KO wins to his name, and none of those have really happened at a high level. So as much as he looks like and he feels like this explosive powerhouse striker, he's really not. He likes to get in there and grapple, and that's kind of his biggest thing, is he is an explosive wrestler. He puts those legs to good use inside the octagon. However, Darko Stosic is a high-level judo practitioner, and what that means is he is going to have the hips and the ability to defend the takedown, and I think that is going to play a massive role in this fight. Devin Clark is going to look for the grappling. He's going to stay on the outside, try to explode in with some long shots. Those I don't expect to hurt a guy like Darko. He's going to get in for the clinch, get in for the takedown, and he won't be able to get it. One thing that Darko likes to do that I love is he is a monster when it comes to the leg kicks. And actually, in Devin Clark's last fight against Alexander Rakic, who we will see later on in this card, he got hurt. Alexander landed a couple of good leg shots, and Devin Clark notably wanted to switch stances. You could see that it bothered him. He did not like taking those leg kicks. Watching tape on Darko Stosic, that's something that he does regularly. He actually has TKO'd several people via leg kick. He is a monstrous leg kicker. So if he's going to be able to control the space, he's going to be able to back up and bust those legs up, and then he also will be able to defend the takedown and keep this thing standing. I expect that Darko Stosic is going to finish Devin Clark. I just don't think Devin Clark is big enough to come up against these 205ers, and Darko Stosic honestly might be the worst stylistic matchup for a guy like Devin Clark in the UFC. Darko Stosic, like I said, is 13-1-0, and this is only his second UFC fight, but he fought Jeremy Kimball in July of 2018 and TKO'd the shit out of him in round 1. I expect him to continue on this tear. I think we get to see some big things from Darko Stosic in the future. He will be our first play of UFC Stockholm, Sweden. And the nicest thing about this is that lots of people are betting Devin Clark here. I do not understand this. People are very confident in Devin Clark, and I just see absolute holes in his game. Darko opened up as a -170 favorite. I was already leaning towards him, at minus 170. I didn't really like the line, but I still thought he won the fight. We can now get him as good as plus 100 over at 5 dimes. Let's lock that up. We are getting the rightful favorite at even money, which is value, ladies and gentlemen. Darko Stosic at plus 100. The next fight on the card is a women's fight that we are just going to completely avoid. Bay Malakani versus Duda Santana, 2-0 versus 3-0. This is one of those ones where I know they're trying to round out the women's division, and maybe we can look forward to seeing something on their next fights, but both of them are just too young in their MMA careers. I do not feel comfortable going on either side of it, and honestly, I don't know if they're even UFC caliber fighters at this point, so we're going to completely avoid that one. After that, we've got a lightweight tilt between Nick Hein and Frank Camacho. Nick Hein is 14-4-0. Frank Camacho is 21-7-0. And this one I do want to mention because I have a slight lean to Frank Camacho. I am not going to make him an official pick. He right now is sitting, the fight's sitting around to pick him. Frank Camacho was a slight underdog when the line opened up, and more of the money has come in on him. About 63% of the money has come in on Camacho, driving this thing down to a pick 'em. So it's minus 110, minus 106, minus 105. Those are kind of the lines that we're going to be looking at. Bookmaker's the only one, I think it looks like, and BetOnline that have Nick Hein as a slight favorite. Now, Frank Camacho is on a bit of a rough patch right now, having gone, 1-3 in his last 4 fights. So he's not overly impressive at the moment, with his most recent loss coming via KO head kick. So he's on a bit of a slump, and that's the reason we're going to pass on this thing. Both of these guys are on losing streaks. Nick Hein is on a 2-fight losing streak versus Davi Amos and Damir Hadzovic, and both of them, he just hasn't looked good. I went back and I watched those tapes, and I am not really impressed with Nick Hein. He had a lot of hype kind of coming in. He came into the UFC strong. He won his debut against Drew Dober, and then he dropped a decision to James Vick, which, not a lot of shame there. He went on a 3-fight winning streak. All 3 were unanimous decisions, and then he had, the 2 losses in a row, the Davi Amos face crank submission, and then he lost a close split decision to Damir. So he potentially could be the better fighter here, but I think that Frank Camacho just has more things going for him. That being said, he has lost 3 out of his last 4 UFC fights, but I do think he's been fighting a higher level of competition. So take that with a grain of salt. I was very close to picking Frank Camacho, but both of these guys seem inconsistent. They both seem to be at a bit of a crossroads in their UFC careers, and when that happens, that really brings out the dog in people, and they're either going to go for it balls out, or they're going to shell up and be very protective because they just want to win that fight. All they want to do is get that W and get out of there, whatever that takes, just so they don't get cut from the UFC. So we could see a very tentative type of match between these two, or we could see someone like Frank Camacho, who I feel like is maybe a bit more urgency, going 1-3 in his last 4. He might come out a little harder and maybe even go for that finish, which it's just lots of variance, because he could go for it and put himself in a bad position and then lose the fight that way because he got a little over aggressive, or he could go for it and then just crack Nick Hein with something big and put him away. So let's call it a day on that one. I have said that this is a pass enough times in a row for you all to get the picture. The next fight at lightweight again is Stevie Ray versus Leonardo Santos, and this is another one where I've got a lean, but I don't want to touch it. Stevie Ray has been the more active of these fighters by far. His record stands at 22-8-0, and he's fighting Leonardo Santos, who we haven't seen in several years. Now, this is an interesting spot because Leonardo Santos is 16-3-0. He hasn't lost since 2009. Now, we haven't seen him in the UFC since 2016, but prior to the win over Adriano Martins, he fought Kevin Lee. Now, granted, a very young Kevin Lee in 2015, but he TKO'd Kevin Lee in round 1. And he has shown a very high level of finishing ability. He's got 9 submissions on his record. Basically, just over half of his wins have come by submission. So arguably, you would think that he would be the better of the 2 fighters, having only lost 3 times, and that being a long time ago. Now, the catch here is that he is 39 years old, and my magic number of 40 is being reached, especially at the lower weight classes, the older you get, usually it tends to hit you a bit harder. The bigger guys, the light heavyweights, the heavyweights, they can keep fighting through 40 years old sometimes because they can still count on that veteran savvy even if they slow down a little bit. They tend to retain their power. They can always have that shot to win by knockout. The lighter weight guys, they're so dependent on their speed that once that speed starts to slow down just a little bit, they lose that 1%, they lose that 2%. That's when the next level, the next generation can come in and really take advantage of them because they just can't keep up anymore. Stevie Ray is one of those prime examples. Now, he lost very recently by KO to Paul Felder in 2017, and then he dropped a split decision to Cajun Johnson back in 2018. Both of those are pretty bad. I mean, I'm high on Paul Felder, so I guess there's not so much to take from that loss. However, the KO loss in round 1, that's kind of telling. Cajun Johnson is a fighter that is no longer in the UFC, and while I don't think he was as bad as people made him out to be, if you're fighting to a split with a guy that doesn't belong in the UFC anymore, that's questionable. Now, his other two notable wins before that were Joe Lozon and Ross Pearson, both who are retired MMA fighters as well. He won a unanimous decision against Jason Ayari in October 2017. I'm just personally not that high on Stevie Ray. I don't think he's really fought anybody, or at least he hasn't beat anybody of note, whereas Leonardo Santos, even though he's coming back after a 3-year layoff, he has the higher level of competition, and he was demolishing that higher level of competition. So I think that Leonardo Santos really is gonna be the pick on this one. I am not going to make an official play on this. We're not going to have a bet. Santos opened up a minus 255 favorite, and that's just way too wide. So much money, 61% of the money has come in on Stevie Ray. That's knocked him down a little bit, but he's still sitting at about minus 205, minus 210, and that is just too much juice to lay on a guy who we know nothing about for the past 3 years. Now, he's a Brazilian monster. He does fight out of Novo União, who that gym has kind of gone downhill in recent years, so that's not saying a lot. If you go back 6-7 years or so, if you said he was from Novo União, you'd have a little light bulb would have gone off in your head going, oh man, this guy needs a bet then. But these days, Novo União is not having the track record that it used to be known for. Stevie Ray is a live dog here at plus 180 simply because of the questions in Leonardo Santos. If we had seen Leonardo Santos come out, maybe gotten one fight in the last 3 years or something like that, I would be all over him here, assuming he wasn't showing lots of downside. But I really think this is a spot that the UFC is trying to highlight a hometown guy. Stevie Ray is the local fighter here. He's from Scotland. So he's going to be as close to hometown in this fight as you're going to get. Leonardo Santos is a guy who has a name. He's got a record. And he is coming in after a 3-year layoff. It's not that hard to see what the UFC is trying to do in this spot. They want to get Stevie Ray that win. You're not going to highlight a 40-year-old fighter. You're not going to bring a guy like Santos to the wrong country and have him upset the hometown guy to build a name and build a star off of him. That's not what's happening. They're trying to bump up Stevie Ray. The UFC wants Stevie Ray to win this fight. I just don't know if he can. So if you want to take that stab at plus 180 on Stevie Ray, you're betting with the UFC. It's kind of like betting with the house, but I can't do it because I think Leonardo Santos outclasses him pretty much everywhere. So we're going to go ahead and pass one more time. Real quickly, I want to touch base on the next fight, which is Tanya Evinger versus Lena Landsberg. And this is another fight where I just want to caution everybody from making too big of bets on. Tanya Evinger opened up as a sizable minus 190 favorite, and she's been bet all the way up to minus 280. Over at 5 times, she's up as far as minus 280. Holy crap, I didn't expect to say that. I'm sorry, you're hearing my surprised reaction live on podcast, because I expected her to be 230, 240, but 280? Shit. Lena Landsberg is 8-4-0, and at plus 240, it's such a wide line. This is one of those ugly fights where I think there's tons of line value on Lena Landsberg, but I don't have the balls to take it because I don't really see a path to victory for her. I'm going to leave it mostly at that. Tanya Evinger is the better of these two fighters, but there's no way she should be a minus 300 to anybody. No way in hell should she be a minus 280 favorite over pretty much anybody in that division. Lena Landsberg, but I can't even call her a live dog. So let's just stay away from this one and move right along before I drive myself nuts going into it. So that is going to end our preliminary card breakdown. We're going to move right on to the main card here. We've got Daniel Teymur facing off against Sung Bin Jo. Now, Daniel Teymur, if you recall, we broke down his fight not too long ago, actually. His most recent fight was one that we talked about him being the lesser of the Teymurs. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, with his last loss coming to Chris Fishgold, who was the one that we were on in February of 2019. Before that, he got subbed by Julio Arce, and before that, he lost his UFC debut, a unanimous decision against Danny Henry. Now he's facing off against Sung Bin Jo, 9-0 from South Korea. And this is another spot where Daniel Teymur is the hometown fighter. And I'm not sure what the UFC is looking to do here, because usually you want to highlight people when they're in their hometown. You want to give them that win, let the hometown crowd feel happy and cheer. But honestly, it looks to me like the UFC is trying to build a new fighter off of Daniel Teymur. Now, they're not giving him a grappler. That's what he's primarily been struggling against, is grapplers. And Sung Bin Jo is far from that. He does have submission wins on his record. However, it was from really low-level Asian type of regional competition. And that's really not something that you can count on. Those kind of guys would get thrashed at the UFC level. Now, Sung Bin Jo, he does have some impressive wins on his record as far as how he accomplished those wins, not necessarily the names on his record. And this is another one where I'm struggling because of the line. I actually think Sung Bin Jo wins this fight. However, this is his first time stepping up to UFC level competition, and Daniel Teymur does have 3 UFC fights. Now, he got finished on the ground in 2 of those fights, but he was doing pretty well in the striking department before losing by submission. And he did lose a unanimous decision against Daniel Henry, but that's a 3-round UFC caliber striking match. So Sung Bin Jo is going to step in here and he's going to fight this guy who's got a full range of UFC experience above him, and he's used to fighting scrubs on the Asian regional scene. So I don't feel comfortable laying -145, -150 on him for his debut fight. Now, if this thing gets down to a pick'em, if enough money keeps pouring in on Teymur like it has been to drive this fight to a pick'em price, I will end up taking a poke on Sung Bin Jo. He's going to have a height and reach advantage, and especially because this fight will more than likely stay on the feet, I expect that to play in. Daniel Teymur is not a bad striker. He's a very efficient striker, but when you're the shorter fighter of the two in Sung Bin Jo, he's got some really good looping type of hook punches. He strikes with a lot of power. He's very good up against the cage. I think he wins this fight. I think he gets out of there with a win. Daniel Teymur gets his 4th UFC loss, and they cut him from the promotion. But I am not going to trust Sung Bin Jo until I see him against a UFC caliber fighter, and this is really that proving ground. If he was the dog because he was the new kid on the block, if this was a pick'em because he was the new kid on the block, then I'd have to go ahead and take him. I do agree that maybe there is some line value with Daniel Teymur, so some of those people that got him at the opener when he was up to, plus 160, somewhere in that ballpark, good on you guys for snagging it while it was there. But I don't know that he actually pulls the fight off. Whoever set this line, though, -185 for Sung Bin Jo, it's almost criminal. He should not be that big of a favorite. I think the line is about correct where it's at right now, and there will be some value on Sung Bin Jo as he continues to drop down to a pick'em price. So keep an eye out on my Twitter. Keep an eye out on that line movement as the fight gets closer, because we may end up on that one. Right now I have a heavy lean to Sung Bin Jo. Our next fight is one that I am interested in. We've got Damir Hadzovic facing off against Christianos Giagos. And Damir is 13-4-0. Christianos is 16-7-0. This is another lightweight fight, and I am all over Hadzovic in this fight here. Basically, this spot is a fade of Christianos Giagos. He's only got one path to victory in this fight, and that's his grappling. He is not going to submit a guy on the level of Damir Hadzovic, so Christianos Giagos has to out-grapple Damir over the course of a full 15 minutes to get the nod from the judges here, and I just do not see that happening. First off, Hadzovic is another one of those guys who's in kind of a neighboring country. He's going to be the quote-unquote hometown fighter here, and he is 32 years old. Again, like I said, he is 13-4. Now, his last 2 fights that he dropped, one of them was a decision. He did get KO'd by Mirbek Taisimov, but that's another one of those ones where you can't really fault the guy too bad. It was his UFC debut. He took his lick, and since then, he's gone 3-1. He had a very impressive, actually 2 impressive KO wins over Marco Polo Reyes and Marcin Held in his UFC tenure. He seems to be the kind of guy that is capable of taking a step up in competition. Now, Cristano Giagos is not a step up in competition. This is a guy who's only fought low-level competition. His first UFC fight was just in 2018, where he was brought in to face Charles Oliveira. Now, he got subbed by Charles Oliveira in round 2. No shame in that loss, right? I mean, Charles Oliveira subs basically everybody and looks like a monster right now. However, he fought Mizuta Hirota in his next fight. He did win a unanimous decision in December of 2018, but that fight was ugly. Mizuta Hirota is not a UFC level talent. The guy is currently on a 3-fight losing streak, with one of those losses coming to Ross freaking Pearson. I mean, he just does not belong in the octagon. He's 18-10, and Cristano Giagos struggled against that guy. He struggled to keep him down. He couldn't finish him and put him away, and that was all he had. So when you've got a guy that's like this, he's 29 years old, he just does not seem to have a well-rounded mixed martial arts game. It's heavy on the grappling, and if he cannot out-grapple you and he cannot submit you, he doesn't have a way to win. Damir is going to murk this kid. I see him having the takedown defense to be able to keep this fight standing, and when it's on the feet, the Bosnian Bomber is going to have a massive advantage. I do think this is the UFC setting up another hometown guy. They've got a guy in Cristano Giagos who's coming off of a win, who probably doesn't belong in the UFC, and he is a sacrifice to make Damir look good. We are going to take Damir in this fight. However, we are going to parlay him with somebody a little bit later in the card. So just put a pin in that for now. He's sitting at about minus 176 on Pinnacle, so keep that number in mind. Next up, we're going to head down the scales to featherweight, where Makwan Amirkhani, 14-3-0, faces off against Chris Fishgold, who is 18-2-1. And this fight I am very, very interested in. So I feel like Makwan Amirkhani is kind of the Twitter mush for this fight. And those of you who don't know that terminology, Twitter mush is basically where all the UFC and MMA handicappers are on the same guy. And everyone's tweeting out about how they're on him, everyone's so confident on him, everyone's so high on them, and then they crash and burn. And that's not something that necessarily is the fault of UFC cappers, because a lot like us, they're analyzing this fight, they're looking at the same things, and when there's a big upset, it's only natural that a lot of people are going to be on the side of the favorite or the side of the fighter who got upset. But the mush basically is kind of a bad luck type of thing. Everyone likes to say that, you know, if some guy is the Twitter mush or some girl is the Twitter mush, they're almost destined to lose because so many people are on them and it's a close fight. And that's where I kind of feel this one sits. Chris Fishgold is a very, very live fighter here. Now, 52% of the money overall has come in on Makwan Amirkhani, and he opened up as, I can't say that name, Makwan Amirkhani. Thank you. He opened up at plus 110, and 52% of the money has come in on him. He is sitting right around plus 100. Chris Fishgold opened up at minus 130, and he's only dropped down to about minus 120, minus 125. You can get him at minus 112 at Pinnacle. And I have a heavy lean to Fishgold. We are not going to take an official pick on this one yet again, because I just haven't been able to quite make up my mind on this one. I would like a little more line value on Fishgold. He's the younger of the two fighters. Makwan fights out of SBG Ireland, which of course you all know as the camp that brought us Conor McGregor and Artem Lobov. The last time we saw Makwan Amirkhani in the UFC octagon, he was facing off against Jason Knight. And speaking of Artem Lobov, Artem was the last guy to face Jason Knight in bare knuckle boxing. That's right, Jason Knight is no longer in the UFC, and Makwan won a split decision over Jason Knight. Before that, he lost a split decision to Arnold Allen. And before that, he did win a unanimous decision and actually was on a 3-fight win streak over some questionable, rather low-level competition. The dude is explosive, he's got a good grappling game, but he is fighting and winning against guys who do not belong in the UFC. Honestly, the guys that he beat, let's take a look at his past wins, okay? So we already mentioned Jason Knight, right? Jason Knight is in bare knuckle boxing these days. He fought and lost before that, so we're going to skip over that fight to Arnold Allen. But you know what? Arnold Allen is 14-1. He's a legitimate prospect. So that's a legitimate loss, okay? Before that, he won against Mike Wilkinson. Now, Mike Wilkinson is 1-4 in his last 5. He is another guy that stepped into the UFC, went 2-2, dropped out of the UFC, and now he's getting KO'd in a B league somewhere else. Before that, he fought Maso Fullen, who is also 1-4 in his last 5, who also got dropped out from the UFC, and in his last fight got subbed in round 1. Before that, he fought Andy Ogle, the Little Axe, and he is 1 in his last 6. So it just gets worse the further on down the record you go. The only guys that Makwan Amirkhani is beating in the UFC are guys that truly do not belong in the UFC. I really feel like he's getting the Artem Lobov treatment here, where because he's from SBG Ireland, because he is from the camp that brought us guys like Conor McGregor, they want him in the UFC. He does have some skills, don't get me wrong. He's a decent distance striker, and he is a fun grappler to watch. He gets into lots of scrambles and stuff like that, but he is facing very low-level competition, and his last 2 fights were split decisions. It was a split loss and a split win. So, I mean, they could have both gone either way, but I just am not as impressed with him as I feel like I should be. Chris Fishgold, on the other hand, is 18-2-0, and he stepped into the UFC, and unfortunately, we were on him. He lost to Calvin Kattar in round 1 by KO. So that wasn't fantastic. But then he fought Daniel Tamer in his last fight back in February, the one that we discussed. We cashed a bet on Chris Fishgold on that fight. So he's technically rather untested at the UFC level as well. But I do think he's got the higher upside. He's the younger of the 2 fighters, and I think he's got the more room to improve. Makwan Amirkhani tends to come in, he throws some wild strikes from outside of range, and then as soon as he gets in close, he causes scrambles. Now, he tends to get reversed. That's something I saw in the tape over and over and over again, is fighting against these guys who are not UFC caliber, who are lower level competition. He gets them on the ground. He doesn't seem to be able to sink those submissions in, and then he gets reversed. And that led to a lot of these decisions that he's getting onto, as he wasn't able to put them away. Chris Fishgold is a talented wrestler. He's also going to be the shorter of the 2 fighters. And we've talked about this a couple of times. When there's a wrestling type of situation, you want to be on the shorter fighter because it's going to be harder to get under their hips. They're going to have just kind of a natural advantage to stay low and avoid being taken down. Plus, the way Makwan Amirkhani scrambles, Chris Fishgold has a much more controlling type of top game. He's a very dangerous submission artist himself, and I think Makwan Amirkhani is going to open himself up to be finished. The other thing I think we might be able to see is if Makwan instigates a ground game, Chris may be able to reverse or defend the takedown and end up on top. And Chris Fishgold has got some brutal ground and pound. I would not be surprised if Chris Fishgold was able to ground and pound out Makwan Amirkhani. I was taking a look at the props for this fight a little bit earlier. Over at 5 Dimes, they've got all the fun little props out that you can get your hands on. And Chris Fishgold winning by KO is something nuts. Right now, you can get Chris Fishgold to win by KO TKO at plus 590, and I just think that's bonkers. If he locks Makwan down and just starts pounding and the ref steps in and waves it off, you're getting damn near 6-1 on that result. I know Makwan's never been KO'd, but Chris Fishgold has a very, very underrated ground and pound game. So I think there's some value there on that line if you want to roll the dice that Fishgold wins this thing by KO. I'm going to keep an eye on this one. At this point in time, it's another pass, but I've got a very heavy lean to Chris Fishgold, especially at that pick'em price. But I'm trying to avoid these volatile type of situations, and this is another spot where 2 relatively untested fighters are coming in against each other, and I'm not sure what the UFC is looking for here. Like I said, I think they want Makwan Amirkhani to look good, but Chris Fishgold is not the kind of guy that you bring in to make Makwan Amirkhani look good. This is a legitimate spot where you've got 2 young up-and-coming guys who are both capable of becoming future stars and making names off of each other. This is a weird matchup for them to give Makwan Amirkhani if he's supposed to be the hometown type of guy. If he's supposed to get the shine on him, I don't know why you give him Fishgold in this spot, because Fishgold's fucking tough. So we'll keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on my Twitter. If Chris Fishgold gets to dog money, I will probably take a stab at him, and I might end up playing on one of these props here. I'm going to be honest with you all. This is one where I really want to bet Chris Fishgold. I'm sitting here right now, and it's taking everything I've got not to say that I'm official on Chris Fishgold right now, and I don't know why. One of the biggest things in sports betting, especially if you've been watching MMA and doing it for a while like I have, you learn to listen to your gut. And my gut tells me that I need to be careful on this fight. I don't know why. I really want to bet Chris Fishgold. But there have been a lot of people that are all over Damir, and some people who are very confident in Damir. And even though I'm seeing holes in Damir's game, and even though I'm seeing that Chris Fishgold can very easily take advantage of those holes, something is keeping me from pulling the trigger. So if you want to tail that lean, do it at your own risk. Again, I'm going to mull on it. I'm going to see how these guys look, especially like at the weigh-ins. I think that's going to tell me a lot. And we'll make a decision later on in the week. So I do apologize. This is a very volatile card. I'm trying to find plays for you, but I don't want to shoot a ton of plays out that I'm just not confident in, because that's how you end up in those situations like where we got reverse swept. I don't want to give you plays for the sake of giving you plays. I'm giving you my opinions, I'm giving you my leans, and as I get the information I need to turn those into actual picks, I will do so. But as of right now, there's something wrong. There's something in my gut telling me to stay my hand and not quite make Fishgold a pick. So, full honesty, being open with you all like I always am, that's the reason why Chris Fishgold is not a pick right now. There is something in my gut that tells me to wait. So I'm going to watch and keep an eye out, and if I get what I need, I will tweet out that he's an official pick later on. Follow me at Die MMA Pod on Twitter so that I can get that information to you as soon as possible. And that brings us to the last 3 fights on the card, which is an awesome light heavyweight showcase. We've got 3 205-pound fights in a row, which 205 was my favorite division at the very beginning of my tenure as a UFC fan. It was the golden era of 205, where you had guys like Chuck Liddell, you had guys like Randy Couture hadn't quite gotten out of there yet, Rampage Jackson, Vanderlei Silva, then you got the Ultimate Fighter guys like Forrest Griffin coming up and Rashad Evans that took the belt. I loved 205. 205 was the best division the UFC had to offer for a long time, and I've still got a real deep attachment to it because of that. So we're going to step up here with Jimmy Manuwa facing Alexander Rakic, and we talked about Alexander Rakic just a little bit earlier in the show with his win over Devin Clark back in December. Now, Jimmy Manuwa is getting close to that ripe old age of 40. He's sitting at 39, and he's on a 3-fight losing streak. And this is exactly where and why we start talking about that 40-year-old age. He just looks like he's slowed down. The dude's got heavy hands. He's got solid punching skills. 15 of his 17 wins are by KO. However, 4 of his 5 losses are by KO, and 3 of those 5 were in the last 2 years. He's definitely on the downslide. He looked like he was going to be one of those quick, out of nowhere, we've got a title contender type of guys, and that got shut down real quick. He ran into Anthony Rumble Johnson back in 2015, and that's one of those ones where you kind of shrug and you're like, no shame to that. His first loss prior to that was against Alexander Gustafsson, who at the time was the far and away number 1 contender that everyone thought was going to take out John Jones, so no harm in that. He beats Jan Blachowicz, he beats OSP, he beats Corey Anderson, and you're like, okay, this guy's ready for his title shot now. Then he runs into the freight train that is Volkan Oezdemir, gets KO'd in 42 seconds, and that was really when we got introduced to no-time Volkan Oezdemir. Jan Blachowicz, he lost a decision after that, and then he got crushed by Thiago Santos in December 2018. And that was another one that happened early on in the second round. I think this is a spot where Jimmy Manuwa has just kind of run his course. He's not a title contender anymore, and he's probably winding down in his career after taking, the KO rough losses that he has. He's KO or bust. He either comes out and knocks you out in the first round, or at that point he gasses out, slows down, and leaves enough openings to get cracked himself. Alexander is 11-1-0, and he's athletic. He's 27 years old, and he is showing off some real good skills. I think he's going to be able to angle. He's going to stay at range. He'll be able to avoid the blitzes of Jimmy Manuwa, and I don't don't think this fight lasts very long. In his last fight against Devin Clark, he really showed some beautiful killer instinct. I think Jimmy Manuwa is going to get hurt, and he's going to get hurt early. Basically, anytime he leaves himself open, Alexander's got that kind of power that is just... Poor Jimmy's chin is just not going to be able to take it. Alexander right now is sitting at about minus 205 over at Pinnacle, and 62% of the money has come in on Jimmy Manuwa, and this is where we've got another one of those curious line movement type of situations. He opened up at plus 185, and he's only down to plus 180. Over at 5 dimes, he's up to plus 190, so we've even got some reverse line movement going on here. Basically, that 39% of money coming in on Alexander is doing some interesting things, but at Pinnacle, we can snag him at minus 205 versus the minus 225 opener, and I love that. We are going to close that parlay that we started with Demir from a little bit earlier, so we've got Demir at minus 176, parlayed with Alexander at minus 205. That's going to give us a nice little plus 133 for our parlay, and let's lock that up. We're going to turn 2 awesome favorites that should probably be bigger favorites into an underdog line. We're going to risk that 1 unit to win 1 unit, plus 133. Let's go. Next up, we have got a fun fight between Ilir Latifi facing off against Volkan No Time Oezdemir. Volkan Oezdemir is 15-4-0 with 3 of those 4 losses coming in his last 3 fights. Now, while that doesn't sound great, let's look at the people he was fighting. He lost against Daniel DC Cormier in a title shot, which there is no shame there. Daniel Cormier is legitimately one of the greatest fighters who has ever graced the UFC's octagon. He's the current 205 and heavyweight champion. So, okay, you got KO'd by the 2-division champ. There's not a whole lot of shame there. He lost against Anthony Smith via late 3rd round submission, and that was a real back and forth battle. That's the one that really put Anthony Smith on the map, and we are going to visit Anthony Smith in this card's main event in the next fight. So, again, it's a loss that he was looking fine in. Volkan Oezdemir was doing his job in that fight, and then he slipped up. Anthony Smith is tall, he's lanky, he's athletic, and he sunk in the hooks and got a body triangle on him, and you're just not going anywhere once you get into that position. So, he made a mistake, and Anthony Smith really made him pay for it. His next fight, he lost a split decision against Dominic Reyes, and that fight really opened up my eyes for Volkan Oezdemir. It almost seemed like he was going to be one of those flare-in and flare-out type of fighters. He really just wasn't that good, but he got in a couple of decent spots that got him the spotlight and the title shot, and then he was going to be out, against any of the legitimate 205ers. He just wasn't going to be able to stand up. But that Dominic Reyes fight, he looked great. We were on Dominic Reyes in that fight, and I was all over Dominic Reyes. I thought Reyes was really going to make Oezdemir look like he was, last week's news. But that was a very close, competitive fight. We almost lost that one. We had Dominic Reyes in a parlay, and I was chomping at the bit. I was so nervous when that thing went to a split decision. I very much think that could have gone Volkan Oezdemir's way. So that being said, having a full 3-round war against a guy like Reyes and looking as good as he did against both DC and Smith before having those losses, I don't think Volkan Oezdemir is as bad as people are giving him credit for. Ilir Latifi, on the other hand, is 14-6, and he basically shits the bed every time he steps up in competition. You look back at his record, all the way back in 2013. Now, granted, we're going way back to 2013. He lost against Gegard Mousasi, who's a natural 185er, and he lost a 3-round decision to him. In 2014, he lost to Jan Blachowicz by TKO. Now, Jan Blachowicz doesn't really TKO very many people these days. I know, again, that was back in 2014, but it has to be said. He went on a 3-fight winning streak against Hans Stringer, Sean O'Connell, and Gian Vellante. Of those 3 names, you probably only know one. You probably only know Gian Vellante. And you know how you know Gian Vellante? You know him as the guy who is 17-11 and just got his ass whipped by Michael Lord Olajaychuk. And he lost a split decision to Sam Alvey. And he lost to Pat Covings. You know Gian Vellante as probably the worst UFC 205er on the roster right now. He then got KO'd stiff by Ryan Bader in 2016. He bounced back with a decision win against Tyson Pedro, and that was one of those performances. Tyson Pedro is the kind of fighter who has 2 different fighters inside of him. He's got the one that shows up and the one that doesn't show up. So Tyson Pedro did not show up that night. I remember that fight very clearly. He did not look good. And Ilir Latifi wasn't able to get him out of there. Now in 2018, he did face Ovince St. Preux, and he did submit Ovince St. Preux in the first round. That was very surprising, and it was very fast. That leads me to put a little asterisk next to it, that it may have almost been a little bit fluky. When you get those first round KO and submissions, they don't always reflect the skill level. They don't always give fighters the chance to do what they need to do. And OSP is another one of those hot and cold type of guys. It looks like Latifi got him on a cold kind of night and then just put him away and really punished him for being a slow starter and not being switched on that night. Now, it sounds with this breakdown like I'm taking a lot away from Ilir Latifi and his performances, and maybe I am. And maybe we should. He's one of those guys that I have honestly just never really been high on. He seems to show up and bite me in the ass at the worst opportune type of moments. But I don't think he's a top 5 205er. I don't think he ever will be. He's short, he's stocky, he charges in with these big looping type of hooks that you can see coming a mile away, and if he can't get you down and grapple you, he's not gonna win. He takes out the lower level, the lower end type of fighters at 205, but once you get up into the top 10, he just can't seem to hang. He's at a physical deficit, and I don't think his skill set is improving. He's 35, so he is getting a little bit older, and I think Volkan Oezdemir is primed for a comeback here. Volkan Oezdemir is only 29 years old, if you can believe that. I know we've been talking about him forever. He was a training partner of Anthony Rumble Johnson, so he kind of got a late introduction to the big show in the UFC. He probably could have been fighting in there a little earlier, so he stormed onto the scene, and I really think they threw him into the title contention type of scenario way too early. They just threw him into the deep end because he had a name attached to him, because they needed people to fight DC when there was really no challengers, and it really kind of derailed him. So now he's had a little bit of time to, get things back together. I know he fought just in March, but again, he didn't take a whole lot of damage, and I think he really looked good. I think a quicker turnaround right now for Volkan Oezdemir to get back on track is a good thing, and Ilir Latifi is just the guy to do it against. Volkan Oezdemir has great takedown defense. I want to give a shout out to Mike Shandel over with the MMA By the Numbers podcast. I listened to his podcast before bringing my podcast to you all every single fight card. He gives a fantastic statistical breakdown of these fights. And Volkan Oezdemir has, I want to say, a 76% takedown defense, and that defense got ruined in his title fight against Daniel Cormier. So arguably speaking, his takedown defense is higher than that. Daniel Cormier is a ultra high level wrestler, so there's no surprise that he was able to take down a guy like Volkan Oezdemir. Ilir Latifi's ground game and takedown game is not on the level of Daniel Cormier. I'm sorry, it's just not. So I expect Volkan Oezdemir to have more around the ballpark of an 85% takedown defense to a 90% takedown defense against this kind of competition. So if Volkan Oezdemir can keep this fight standing, that means that he is going to have a massive advantage, especially due to his height and reach, and the way that Ilir Latifi cannot stay in the pocket and trade. He lunges in, and he gasses out after not being able to get the takedown. I think Volkan Oezdemir should win this fight. I know a lot of people and a lot of money has been coming in on Ilir Latifi, and it's another one where I just don't get it. Now, he did open up as a plus 145, and at 205 heavyweight, that's where, you get those middle of the road kind of guys. You take the dog because anything can happen, but I think Volkan Oezdemir is the rightful favorite, and right now we can get him as low as minus 118 over at Pinnacle, and that's where we're going to take him. We're going to be on Volkan Oezdemir for this fight. He's the rightful favorite. He's going to get the bounce back, and Ilir Latifi is almost a perfect opponent for him to do so. That brings us to the main event of the evening, where Anthony Lionheart Smith will step up and face Alexander the Mauler Gustafsson in his backyard of Stockholm, Sweden. Alexander Gustafsson is 18-5-0, where Anthony Smith is 31-14-0. Alexander Gustafsson is best known for his rivalry against John Jones, who John put a definitive stamp on in their last fight. The first fight, he took John Jones the full 5-round distance, and a lot of people thought that he won that fight. John Jones eked out a split decision victory, and Alexander had been chomping at the bit to get that rematch basically forever. John put an end to that. He completely outclassed him in the rematch back in December of 2018, and he put him down in round 3, basically ending Alexander Gustafsson's hope for being the 205-pound champion forever. Now let's look at Alexander Gustafsson's losses. He lost to Jon Jones originally in 2013. He got KO'd brutally by Anthony Rumble Johnson, and then he did get his title fight against DC Cormier, where he dropped a split decision. Now that was a close back and forth fight, but he took a lot of damage in that fight as well. He did beat Jan Blachowicz, he did beat an old withered Glover Teixeira, and he got it done in the 5th round against Glover, might I say. And then he got his rematch against Jon Jones. He got blasted by Jon Jones in the 3rd round. So if we look back at the kind of fights Alex Gustafsson has had, he beat mid-level competition, Thiago Silva, Mauricio Shogun Rua, Jimmy Manuwa, Jan Blachowicz, Glover Teixeira, and he showed really solid performances. I know if you look at, statistically speaking, the numbers, he far and away outclassed his opponents. But as soon as you dipped him into the top 3, as soon as he fought Jon Jones, Rumble Johnson, and Cormier, not only did he lose, but he got wrecked by most of them. He took a lot of damage in that first war against Jon. He took a lot of damage in the war against Daniel Cormier. And then he took 2 big KO losses against Johnson and Jones. And now he's facing Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith is a big underdog in this fight, and he should be. He's about plus 265 over at 5 Dimes, plus 250 at Pinnacle, and plus 250 is about the ballpark that the other books have him sitting at right now, although you can get him at plus 270 over at Heritage. 62% of the money has come in on Anthony Smith, but it is definitely a reverse line movement type of situation where the money apparently is bigger and more valued, coming in on Gus, moving him from a minus 275 all the way up to a minus 325, minus 330 type of spot. And honestly, we're going to steer into the curve here. We are going to take Anthony Lionheart Smith. Pause for dramatic effect. We're going to lock up Anthony Smith at plus 265, and I'll tell you why. This is a pure fade on Alexander Gustafsson's mental state. This is a crossroads fight between 2 fighters that are headed different directions. Alexander Gustafsson has got his title shots, and he's come up short every single time. Jon Jones is not going anywhere. He's in the prime of his career, and he's really starting to run circles around the people at 205. They are not going to do a trilogy fight against Jon Jones when he lost a decision where Jon Jones literally openly stated that he was not trying because he was looking past Alexander Gustafsson, but still got it done, and then KO'd him the next time they faced each other 5 years later. Jon Jones is far and away the better fighter. Alexander Gustafsson has taken a lot of damage in his UFC career, and I honestly question his chin. At this point, I also question his heart. Now, I know there are a lot of diehard Alexander Gustafsson fans out there who are going to get real upset at me for saying this, because they did that the last time we broke down his fight. But because of the fact that he's gotten his title shots and he will not be getting more of them, he has already been on record speaking about retirement. He's thinking about it. It's in his mind. He knows he will never be the number 1 guy. He knows he will never touch gold unless somebody else dethrones Jon Jones. How is he motivated to step in for this fight right now? He's not. And that's the key. Anthony Smith went on a tear, although it was against some lower level competition and some older, more retiring type of fighters. He has been on a tear lately. He came up to 205 where he's got a rejuvenated career and he's looked much better. And he is a dangerous finisher. Even though statistically speaking, he doesn't have the precision or the numbers like a guy like Alexander Gustafsson does, he is always live in a fight. And his last fight against Jon Jones, he went the full 5 rounds and basically turtled up and got shut down by Jon Jones. He didn't really show us anything. He has come out and done a lot of interviews, and all he's talking about is the fact that he just needs to get back to fighting. He doesn't have a game plan against Alexander Gustafsson. The game plan is to get in there and be himself, because he is so disappointed about what happened in the Jon Jones fight. He basically sat back and let Jon do whatever he wanted. I expect that Anthony Smith is going to come out, and he's going to come out hard. He's going to come out with a vengeance. He's going to look to hurt Alexander Gustafsson. We have a hungry fighter who thinks that he didn't show well in a title fight, and it was his first title fight, and he wants it back. He wants to get back to that title fight. So Anthony Smith is on the short list of UFC contenders right now at 205. Alexander Gustafsson is in no man's land. He has nothing to fight for. He has nothing to fight for but his own pride, and retirement is in the back of his mind. Anthony Smith is coming out to make a statement that his last fight, his embarrassment performance, was not the kind of person that he is, and he truly does belong in the title picture against guys like John Jones. So I'm going to bet on the hungry fighter. Now, this may be a bad bet, simply speaking, because Alexander Gustafsson's numbers do all show a little bit better than Anthony Smith's across the board. But I think it's a mental game. I'm going to bet that the hungrier of the two fighters is going to show up and look to make a statement. Alexander Gustafsson may be able to dig deep and really come back and work his way back into a fight when there is something to fight for. But when he's in there against a monster who's coming after him time and time and time again and does not go away when he hits him with everything he's got, that'll deflate your sails a little bit. And when your sails are already a little deflated and you're not sure why you're in there anymore, and you know that you're not going to ever get that crack at John Jones for a third time, what do you have to dig deep for? I am actually questioning whether or not Alexander Gustafsson will break in this fight. And when someone is willing to break, Anthony Smith breaks them. So let's take a stab with that big, juicy dog money to go ahead and round out our night. Lock it up at 5 dimes for plus 265. Let's go, Lionheart. Let's take a look back at those bets. We've got Darko Stosic at plus 100. We are going to parlay Damir Hadzovic and Alexander Rakic for plus 133. We are going to ride with Volkan No Time Oezdemir to get back on track at minus 118. And then we are going to take a deep breath, plug our nose, and plunge with Anthony Lionheart Smith at plus 265 in the main event. Keep an eye out on my Twitter. We're going to look closely at Sungvin Joe and Chris Fishgold. Those might turn into plays. Give me a follow at DieHard MMA Pod. Thank you all for the love and support. Let's get this thing going. I'm so happy we've got MMA back. Give me a tweet, give me a favorite, give me a 5-star rating, share the podcast with a friend, turn on that little bell on YouTube so you can get notified every time I upload a new episode. In the comments section, let me know who your favorite play for UFC Stockholm, Sweden is gonna be. Thank you all one more time for the love and support. I couldn't be here without all of you. Let's roll.